Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today we're going to be taking a deep dive into the world of home hydroponics.
Nice.
Yeah, should be a good one. We've got a really interesting mix of sources for this one.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we got some pretty passionate arguments for why everyone should basically just start farming in their living rooms.
Uh,
And we've got some reports breaking down the costs and the environmental impact, and even a look at one company that thinks this tech could totally revolutionize how we think about food.
oh, wow.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. So I guess the big question is all this hype actually justified?
Right.
Could this really be the key to like a more secure and sustainable future, like some people are saying?
It's definitely way more than just a passing fad. The sources that you sent over, they kind of paint this picture
Mhm.
of a world that's dealing with some pretty major challenges.
Yeah, for sure.
Economic instability, potential conflicts,
Yeah.
and even that kind of lingering memory of how quickly things can just fall apart,
All right.
like we saw with those pandemic disruptions, right?
Oh, yeah, that was crazy. Like, I remember suddenly everyone was like trying to bake bread from scratch, and you couldn't find flour or yeast anywhere.
Exactly. That's exactly the kind of scenario that Richard Payeng Zhu, he's the founder of Freebond AB, he's pointing to
Okay.
when he says that home hydroponics aren't just like some cool gadget,
Yeah.
but they're like a necessity in the 21st century.
So he's basically saying that, like, by growing our own food, we can kind of protect ourselves from those global shocks
Hmm.
and make sure we've always got access to fresh produce no matter what's going on in the world.
Yeah, that's the core of his argument. He sees it as like reclaiming control
Well, yeah.
over our food supply, you know, improving our resilience and reducing our dependence on these systems that are actually quite fragile.
Okay, so
Hmm.
maybe there's more to this than just growing fancy lettuce in your basement.
Right.
But I got to admit, for those of us who are new to this whole idea,
Right.
what exactly is hydroponics?
So it's basically a method of growing plants without soil.
No soil.
No soil. So instead you create this nutrient-rich water solution,
Okay.
and that delivers like everything the plant needs directly to its roots.
Oh, so no more getting my hands dirty.
Yeah, exactly.
I can get behind that.
Right.
But I have to admit, I always kind of imagined hydroponics as being super complicated. With
Yeah.
all those tubes and pumps and things.
Yeah. There is a bit of a learning curve, but it's not as intimidating as it might seem at first.
Okay.
Zoo actually offers this 10-step guide to setting up a simple system. And one of the first things he really emphasizes is like starting small.
Okay.
Begin with just a few easy to grow plants like herbs or
Mhm.
leafy greens and just kind of gradually expand your knowledge and your setup as you gain confidence.
That makes sense. Starting small and building from there is pretty good advice for like pretty much anything new that you try to do.
Totally.
So how does this all connect to that whole sustainability and self-sufficiency angle?
Well, when you really think about it, traditional agriculture,
Yeah.
it uses a ton of resources.
Yeah, that's true.
There's land use, water consumption, pesticides and fertilizers, not to mention all the transportation that's involved in getting food from the farm to your plate.
Yeah, for sure.
Hydroponics offers a way to just significantly reduce all those impacts.
You included a YouTube video in the research that really hammers home that point. It's
Mm.
called Coronavirus Pandemic: How to Grow Crops from the Confines of Your Home with Just Water.
Oh, yeah.
It's amazing. You see people converting like balconies, closets,
Wow.
even their bathrooms into
Yeah.
mini farms.
Yeah. It's such a fascinating example of how even when faced with a crisis, people find ways to innovate, right?
Yeah.
And create these solutions that benefit themselves and the environment.
So there's definitely that like DIY spirit to this whole
Mm.
movement.
Yeah.
But it seems like there are companies like Freebond AB that are trying to make this more accessible to kind of the average person too,
Yeah.
right? And we actually have a cost report here that dives into the economics of using one of their smart planting machines to grow lettuce at home.
Okay.
Are the savings actually as impressive as their marketing makes it seem?
Well, the numbers are pretty compelling. The report says you can grow a head of lettuce for just 27 cents
Wow.
compared to, the average supermarket price of 1.20 euros per head.
Okay, so we're already talking about like almost €1 saved per head of lettuce.
Right.
But I'm guessing you don't buy these machines just to save a few cents on your salads.
Right.
What's the bigger picture here?
Well, the report highlights that with a smart planting machine, you could be looking at monthly savings of around 60 euros.
Wow. Okay.
And if you factor in the initial cost of the machine, the payback period is just over 10 months.
That's not bad at all.
But maybe even more interesting than the lettuce itself
Yeah.
is what this represents. The potential to grow a wider variety of produce at home,
Okay, like what?
including herbs, microgreens, even some fruits. Imagine having fresh, pesticide-free ingredients
Yeah.
readily available right in your kitchen, regardless of the season, or what's happening at the grocery store.
Okay, I have to admit that does sound pretty tempting. It's like having your own personal farmer's market, but without the crowds and the price tag.
Exactly.
But even if the economics make sense, there's still the question of the environmental impact.
Right.
Is all this technology actually better for the planet?
Well, let's take a look at that carbon emission report that you provided.
Okay.
It focuses specifically on Freebond AB's Smart Indoor Farming Cabinet. They estimate that for each head of lettuce grown in their cabinet, you're saving 0.3947 kilograms of CO2e.
Okay.
Compared to traditional agriculture, that's almost 25 kilograms of CO2e saved per month.
Wow, that's like taking a car off the road for what, like 2,000 kilometers per year?
Yeah.
And the report compares those savings to the carbon sequestration of like 3 or 4 young trees. So it seems like the environmental benefits could be pretty significant, especially if more people start using this technology.
Exactly. And those savings are only for lettuce. Just imagine the potential if people start growing a wider variety of produce at home.
Yeah.
This could be a significant step toward more sustainable urban living and reducing our reliance on traditional agriculture.
So it seems like Freebond AB is really pushing the boundaries of what's possible with home hydroponics.
Yeah.
Their mission statement is all about like empowering individuals to reclaim food freedom, health freedom, and economic support. It's a pretty bold vision.
Yeah, they're not just aiming to sell gadgets. They're trying to create a movement.
Right.
And that's where things get really interesting.
Okay, how so?
They talk about a future where decentralized networks of home growers can not only feed themselves,
Wow.
but even sell their produce to neighbors and local businesses.
That's a really cool idea. It's like taking the whole concept of community gardens to a whole new level.
Exactly.
And they even mentioned something about Web3 and DAOs.
Yeah.
But before we get too lost in all the tech jargon, can you break that down a bit for our listeners?
Yeah, so Web3 basically refers to this decentralized internet where users have more control over their data and their online experiences.
Okay.
And a DAO, or decentralized autonomous organization,
Right.
is basically like a community-governed entity
Okay.
that operates on blockchain technology.
Okay.
So in the context of home hydroponics, this could mean like creating platforms where growers can connect, share resources, and even manage their production and sales collectively.
It sounds kind of like a futuristic mix of Etsy and a farmer's co-op.
Right.
But I got to admit, all this talk of high-tech systems and blockchain can make home hydroponics seem a bit intimidating for the average person.
That's a valid concern.
Yeah.
But it's important to remember that Freebond AB also really emphasizes affordability
Yeah.
and user-friendliness. They're
Yeah.
trying to make this technology accessible to everyone,
Okay.
not just the tech-savvy early adopter.
And it's not like you need some fancy machine to get started, right?
Right.
Remember, Richard Zhu, the founder of Freebond, he's a big advocate for DIY hydroponics. He even has a YouTube channel dedicated to teaching people how to build their own systems using just recycled materials.
That's awesome.
So there's definitely an entry point for everyone, regardless of their budget or their technical skills.
Exactly. And I think that's one of the most exciting aspects of this whole movement.
Okay.
It's not just about the technology.
Yeah.
It's about empowering people to take control of their food, their health, and their future.
It's like giving people the tools to become more resilient
Yes.
and self-sufficient, which seems especially relevant in today's world, where so much just feels so uncertain.
Absolutely. And it's not just about lettuce. We're talking about a potential paradigm shift
Wow.
in how we produce and consume food, how we design our cities, and how we relate to the natural world.
Okay, now, my mind is officially blown. But before we get too ahead of ourselves, let's take a step back
Okay.
and look at some of the practical considerations for anyone who's thinking about maybe diving into home hydroponics. I mean, is this something that anyone can actually DO, or are there limitations?
Well, there are definitely some things to keep in mind.
Like what?
Well, space is an obvious one.
Yeah,
If you live in a tiny apartment, you might not have room for a large hydroponic setup,
that's true.
but there are plenty of compact systems
Yeah.
that are designed for small spaces.
What about lighting? I know plants need sunlight to grow.
Yeah, that's where things can get a little tricky.
Yeah.
especially if you don't have a lot of natural light.
Okay.
Many hydroponic systems use artificial lighting,
Yeah.
which can obviously add to your energy costs.
Right.
But there are also systems that are designed for low light conditions.
Okay.
And some people even experiment with using natural light sources as much as possible.
So there are definitely some things to consider before just jumping in,
Mm-hmm.
but it sounds like there are solutions for most of the challenges.
Yeah.
And the resources available online can help people make informed decisions.
Definitely. And don't forget, you can always start small and experiment.
Yeah.
That's part of the fun of gardening, right? Figuring out what works best for your space, your budget, and your lifestyle.
That's a great point. It's all about finding the joy in the process and not getting overwhelmed by all the technical details.
Totally.
So as we wrap up part 1 of this deep dive into home hydroponics, we want to leave you with a question to ponder.
Okay.
If you could grow anything at home, what would it be?
Ooh,
What would your dream hydroponic garden look like?
I like that.
Take some time to imagine the possibilities and join us again for part 2, where we'll delve a little deeper into the potential impact of home hydroponics on society as a whole. We'll explore how this seemingly simple concept could actually reshape our cities, our communities, and our relationship with the planet.
Sounds good. Welcome back to our deep dive into home hydroponics.
It's great to be back.
In part 1, we talked all about, the potential benefits for individuals, things like increasing food security, the sustainability angle, and even the economic perks of growing your own produce.
Yeah, for sure.
But now I'm kind of curious, what happens when we zoom out a little? Okay, and look at the bigger picture. Could this trend actually have a ripple effect on society as a whole?
That's a great question. In the first part, we touched on how those pandemic disruptions really exposed just how fragile those global food systems are.
Right.
So I can definitely see how having more people growing at least some of their own food could make communities more resilient,
Yeah.
especially in times of crisis.
Exactly. If you've got even a small network of home growers in a neighborhood,
Yeah,
it could make a real difference in terms of food access and affordability,
for sure.
especially if those traditional supply chains get disrupted.
And I can imagine that shifting even a small portion of food production away from large-scale industrial farms
Mm-hmm.
and into people's homes, that could have a pretty positive impact on the environment too, right?
Absolutely. Think about all the resources that go into conventional agriculture.
Oh, yeah.
Land use, water consumption, all those pesticides and fertilizers, not to mention all the transportation involved in getting food from the farm to your table. Home hydroponics cuts out a lot of those steps.
And there's less waste too, right?
Totally.
If you're growing exactly what you need,
Mm-hmm.
you're not throwing away as much produce that's gone bad in your fridge.
Right. And because you're controlling that growing environment, you can often harvest produce at its peak ripeness,
Okay, yeah.
which means more flavor and more nutritional value.
So it's not just about lettuce in your living room.
No.
It's about rethinking our whole relationship with food and where it comes from.
Exactly. And one of the most exciting aspects of this is that potential impact on urban landscapes.
Okay.
Imagine cities where rooftops are covered in gardens.
Wow.
Balconies are just bursting with fresh herbs.
Yeah.
Even abandoned buildings are transformed into vertical hydroponic farms.
Okay, now that's a city I want to live in.
Right.
It sounds almost like something out of a sci-fi movie,
It does.
but in a good way.
In a good way. Yeah, it's a vision of a greener, more sustainable, and more self-sufficient urban future.
I love that.
And it's not just about aesthetics either.
Okay.
These green spaces could help improve air quality, reduce that urban heat island effect.
Right.
They could even create habitats for pollinators
Yeah.
and other wildlife.
It's like bringing a little bit of nature back into the concrete jungle.
Exactly.
And I bet having more people growing food in cities would create a stronger sense of community, too.
Absolutely. Imagine neighbors swapping tips and recipes or even collaborating on larger growing projects.
Yeah, that's great.
It could foster a whole new level of connection and a sense of shared purpose.
And let's not forget the educational value.
Oh, yeah.
Imagine kids growing up learning about where their food comes from
Mm-hmm.
and how to grow it themselves.
That's such an important point. It's about more than just putting food on the table. It's about empowering people with knowledge and skills that connect them to nature and their communities.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And when you start thinking about all those potential benefits,
Mm-hmm.
from individual well-being
Yeah.
to environmental sustainability to
Mhm.
community resilience,
Yeah.
it's hard not to get excited about all the possibilities.
I know. It's really inspiring.
I'm definitely feeling inspired. But I know that anytime you have a new technology or like a shift in how we do things, there are bound to be some challenges and some questions that come up along the way, right?
Right.
What are some of the potential downsides or maybe hurdles that we need to think about as home hydroponics becomes more widespread?
Well, I think one of the biggest concerns is energy consumption.
Okay.
While hydroponics can be very water efficient, the reliance on artificial lighting, especially in those indoor setups,
Yeah.
can be energy intensive.
Mm.
So it's really important to explore ways to make those systems more energy efficient
Okay.
and to promote the use of renewable energy sources.
That makes sense. We don't want to solve one problem just to create a new one.
Right, exactly. And another challenge is access and equity.
Okay.
We need to ensure that everyone, regardless of their income or living situation,
Right.
has the opportunity to benefit from this technology.
For sure.
That might mean creating community-based programs
Yeah.
or finding ways to make hydroponic systems more affordable and accessible
Okay.
to those who maybe don't have the resources to invest in those expensive setups.
It's about making sure that this movement doesn't just benefit a select few, but it has a positive impact on everyone.
Exactly. And we also need to think about the potential impact on traditional agriculture.
Yeah, that's a good point.
If people are growing more of their own food at home, what happens to the farmers who have traditionally supplied our cities?
That's a really important point. It's not about like pitting home growers against traditional farmers,
Right.
but finding ways to create a more diverse
Yeah.
and resilient food system that benefits everyone.
Right. Maybe there's a way to create like a more symbiotic relationship where local farmers can provide specialized crops or support services to home growers,
Yeah.
or even collaborate on distribution networks.
That's a really interesting idea, is like weaving together all these different approaches
Yeah,
to create like a more robust and sustainable food web.
exactly.
But I can also imagine that as home hydroponics scales up, there might be some questions about regulation and oversight.
Absolutely. We need to think about things like food safety standards,
Right.
waste management, and the potential environmental impact of those large-scale home-growing operations.
Yeah, for sure.
It's important to have those guidelines in place to ensure that this technology is being used responsibly
Right.
and sustainably.
So it seems like there are definitely a lot of complexities and nuances to consider as this technology evolves
Right.
and becomes more integrated into our lives.
It's a reminder that technology is never a silver bullet.
Right.
It's a tool
Yeah.
that we need to use thoughtfully and intentionally. But the potential here is undeniable.
Well,
We're not just talking about a new way to grow lettuce.
Right.
We're talking about like a potential paradigm shift
Ah,
in how we relate to food, to our communities,
Yeah.
and to the planet.
it's a chance to reclaim some agency,
Yeah.
foster some resilience,
Mhm.
and cultivate a more sustainable and equitable future.
Absolutely.
So as we wrap up part 2 of this deep dive into home hydroponics,
Okay.
we want to leave you with a question to ponder.
Okay. I like it.
What role do you see this technology playing in your own life, in your community,
Yeah.
and in the world at large?
That's a good one.
Take some time to reflect on that and join us again for part 3, where we'll get down to the practicalities of setting up your own home hydroponics system and explore some of the exciting innovations that are on the horizon. All right, so welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into the world of home hydroponics.
It's been a great deep dive.
Yeah, it really has. We've explored the individual benefits. We zoomed out and considered that potential impact on society as a whole.
Right.
And now it's time to get down to the nitty-gritty. How can you actually get started with this whole home hydroponics thing?
Well, the good news is there's a whole spectrum of options out there.
Okay.
From those super simple DIY setups to like the high-tech systems that practically do the growing for you.
And, one thing that really struck me as we were going through the research is like that DIY spirit of this movement is alive and well.
Oh, yeah.
Like we talked about Richard Zhu and his YouTube channel where he's showing people how to create hydroponic systems using recycled materials,
Right. Yeah.
empty soda bottles, plastic containers. It's amazing what you can do with a little creativity and some basic supplies.
It's a great way to like dip your toes in the water, so to speak.
Yeah.
Without making a big investment.
Right.
You can start with a few herbs
Huh.
or leafy greens and see how it goes.
Yeah, for sure.
But even if you're not, like the DIY type, there are plenty of ready-made systems available
Okay.
to suit different budgets and space constraints.
Right. There are those countertop systems that are perfect for like smaller apartments.
Yeah.
Vertical gardens, if you're limited on square footage,
Yep.
and even those like sleek, futuristic-looking smart gardens that
Yeah.
we've been seeing popping up everywhere these days.
Yeah, those smart systems are definitely appealing for people who want like a more hands-off approach.
Right.
They often come with all those built-in sensors, automated lighting and watering, and even apps that monitor your plant's progress and send you notifications if something needs attention.
It's like having your own personal gardening assistant.
Totally.
But I imagine those high-tech systems can get pretty pricey.
Yeah.
Where's a good place to start for someone who's curious but maybe not ready to invest in a top-of-the-line setup?
Well, one of the most popular and beginner-friendly methods is called the Kratky method. It's a passive system, so it doesn't require any pumps or electricity.
Oh, wow. Okay.
You basically just set up your plants in a container with a nutrient solution
Okay.
and let them do their thing.
So it's super low maintenance
Yeah.
and doesn't take up a lot of space.
Yeah,
I can see why that would be appealing for beginners.
for sure.
But as you start exploring all these different systems, what are some of the key factors that people should be considering?
Well, space is a big one, like we talked about. Think about how much room you have available
Mhm.
and what kind of system would actually fit in your environment.
That makes sense.
And then there's lighting.
Right, yeah.
If you're growing indoors, you'll need to provide adequate light for your plants.
Okay.
Some systems come with built-in grow lights, while others might require you to set up your own lighting.
And then there's the question of what you actually want to grow. Can you grow anything hydroponically, or are there some limitations?
You can grow a surprisingly wide variety of plants hydroponically.
Oh, wow.
Everything from leafy greens and herbs
Mm-hmm.
to fruits and even some root vegetables.
Okay.
But some plants are definitely easier to grow than others.
Okay.
So it's always a good idea to start with those beginner-friendly varieties and just expand your repertoire as you gain experience.
All right. It's like anything new. You start with the basics and build from there.
Exactly.
But, as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to circle back to something we touched on earlier.
Mm.
That sense of wonder
Mm-hmm.
and discovery
Yeah,
that comes with growing your own food.
it's a good feeling.
It's not just about like the practical benefits.
Right.
It's about connecting with nature and understanding where our food actually comes from.
It's about nurturing something,
Mm-hmm.
watching it grow, and reaping the rewards of your efforts. And there's something like incredibly satisfying about that,
Yeah.
regardless of whether you're, a seasoned gardener or a complete beginner.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's about slowing down, paying attention, and appreciating those simple things.
Mm.
And who knows, maybe this home hydroponics trend is just the beginning
Yeah.
of a much larger shift in how we relate to food, to our communities, and to the planet.
It's an invitation to reimagine what's possible and create a future where everyone has the opportunity to experience that joy and empowerment
Yes.
that's growing their own food.
Well said. And on that note, we want to thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the world of home hydroponics.
Huh.
We've covered a lot of ground,
have.
from practical tips to those bigger picture implications.
Right.
And we hope you found it informative and inspiring.
I hope so. Keep those green thumbs itching, those imaginations blooming. And who knows, maybe one day we'll all be enjoying fresh, homegrown produce from our Martian gardens.
Haha, that's a great image.
Mm.
Until next time, happy growing.